well, I'm going to fast forward there a little bit, but this week's topic is applied performance practices. When I first read the title, read the chapter, I thought it was a bit boring, but in fact it does come to some of the more interesting and useful aspects of organisational behaviour, which of course is a very applied discipline in general. I got a bit more excited about it as I read through the chapter, and I hope I can impart some of that excitement to you. Just ate a couple of apricots, so that's probably the orange stuff you see in my teeth. Anyway, moving on. Okay, we're going to be covering the meaning of money. It's going to be fun. 5 ways you can improve reward effectiveness. Talk about job specialisation, the job characteristics model, which is quite a practical and a good quality model that does have some real predictive powers. Talk about empowerment and talk about self-leadership. But we'll start off with, what does money really mean? Now, money is virtually a pure symbol. There's very little relationship between money, that piece of metal or that small square of plasticky paper, and what money represents, both in terms of what it can buy or in terms of what it represents to us. So in that sense, it is a pure symbol. The relationship between money and what it symbolises is man-made. It's man or humanity that decides the relationship and decides on how much it's worth and what it means. It has symbolic power too, in terms of, and by symbolic power, it represents things like being a marker of performance. So, for example, if you were to pay one staff member $50,000 and another staff member $55,000, apart from the fact that you've paid one 10% more than the other, which boils down to not that much more because of the tax system, $2,500, $3,000 of that $5,000 will go to tax. You will also be creating a distinction and saying this person is more important than the next person. So you do need to be very careful about salaries and packaging to make sure that you don't create conflict where there is no need. And equity, as we've talked about in previous weeks, is a big issue that you need to be aware of. But money, while it is a pure symbol, that is, it's symbolic in power, it actually has accrued or gained quite a bit of power through the ability to buy things with it. So money, we talked about classical conditioning, the case of the Pavlov's dogs hearing a bell ringing and salivating even before they received any reward or meat. So they attached the sound of the bell to the taste of meat and began to produce saliva as a result of just hearing the bell, not even smelling the meat. So money similarly has been classically conditioned with all sorts of rewards, from cars, to holidays, to a sense of freedom, to television sets, chocolates. It's a broad array of what we call fungible rewards that you can purchase with money. And subsequently, money has the power to reinforce behaviour quite potently. I keep on looking around because I suspect I'm going to be thrown out of the building shortly because it's quite late by security staff. So just bear with me. And money, of course, helps to reduce anxiety by staving away anxiety about poverty. And you will find actually in international studies that money is much higher as a reinforcer and has much greater potency in terms of job satisfaction, for example, in countries that are quite poor relative to others. So in a country like Australia, where we've got a free health system, a largely free health system, free education, and where the average or even the minimum wage is relatively healthy, money lacks potency that it has in countries where you're living much closer to the edge. Now, beyond money, you can reward people with a number of different things. You can reward them by membership of a certain group within your organization. You can reward them with simple status, and you'll get this American system which is starting to spread to Australia, where every second person is vice president of something, vice president of marketing, vice president of online marketing, vice president of regional Queensland marketing. So eventually every person in the company is vice president of something. And this is because status in itself, particularly for males, is quite rewarding. And I mean, if I were to be suddenly told that I've received a promotion, but it comes with no money, I'm suddenly become a professor, I would go home happy because of the the reward that I would have received in terms of a status boost. Competencies is also a form of reward, and this comes through training. And in that, that people, as they become better at something, they gain a sense of self-efficacy or competence that comes from achieving and doing a job well, which also relates to task performance. Now, the trouble with using seniority as a form of reward, or using seniority in terms of promotion, and seniority means people who hang around the company long get promoted. It does have the impact of attracting more job applicants to a particular position, but it also creates and it also tends to reduce turnover, but not for very good reasons. So, for example, if you're in a company that has seniority in place, which means that you stay another year and you go up another increment in terms of promotions, the temptation for employees in that kind of company is to cling on with their fingernails onto the cliff of job keeping rather than actually trying to excel. They simply try to avoid getting sacked, because avoiding getting sacked equals getting promoted. Excelling is not what's required. Survival is all that's required. So it tends to reduce high-level performance, and so those poorer performers just cling on in the hope of getting promoted. In terms of status, it tends to motivate competition for promotion because everyone wants to get up that increment. And of course, that kind of competition is healthy for productivity and performance and for creativity and ideas and drive. And if it's linked to equity-related performance management, that is, that if that you get an increase in status not simply for hanging on, the seniority thing, but for actually doing a highly specified task, reaching a sales target, for example, then it's also good for the company. But on the negative side, status-related rewards tend to encourage bureaucratic hierarchy, like vice presidents of this, vice presidents of that, and creates more administrative layers in a company. And it can undermine the ability for a company to respond quickly to the marketplace. And we'll talk about some of the more flexible methods of creating behaviour other than status. Competency-based rewards. You find this, for example, in the mining industry in Australia. If you have a number of tickets to operate a backhoe, as well as operate a grader, as well as operate an excavator, as well as operate a bobcat, linking them with pay increases does make sense from an employer perspective, because the kind of people who have numbers of different tickets can be assigned if the market changes and, for example, there's not as much money in this part of the business but more in that part of the business. These kind of staff that are multi-skilled can be shifted from one place to another without the expense of having to sack. However, it does increase training costs, and you do need to make sure that these are objective measures of success, and you're not just having certificates flung right, left and centre for competencies that don't really exist. Okay. There's a number of different methods of handing out cash or rewards within a business, and that we're talking here about the more normal rewards like money effectively. There's a number of different ways to do it. So you can do it at an organisational level, so whole company level, and that can mean when the company is doing well, profits are shared. It can also be when company is doing well, that, or on a float, for example, and the float goes well, stock options will be listed, often done for senior executives. It can create a sense of ownership on the behalf of the staff, and it's also, of course, matched to the firm's ability to pay. So when the company does badly, its expenses in terms of bonuses, etc., goes down, and when it's doing well, it can afford to pay out. And so there's a kind of nice symmetry between the company's performance and ability to pay and its having to pay. But it does weaken the connection between individual initiative, effort and reward. And how this happens, of course, is that, what happens to a company doesn't necessarily reflect your performance or your individual performance. You can be a hard worker, a high achiever in a company of slackers, for example, and subsequently you can put ever so much effort in, but in terms of your profit share, it's not going to increase, and the value of stock options is not going to increase. And it's also true that there's aspects of a company performance that really aren't captured, not just within the workforce, but, for example, the price of coal can go down due to the economy in China. And no matter how hard you and your mates are digging coal, that doesn't necessarily mean that the company is going to do well. These externalities, external to the company, can impact. There are some wonderful examples in Der Spiegel. If you Google Der Spiegel and have a look at how that company has succeeded in a dying print market. So print is dead, they say that in the media, in newspapers, magazines. The circulation figures tend to be dropping in an alarming manner and being taken up to some degree by online. But Der Spiegel, which is a German, I should zoom in there, Der Spiegel is a German magazine, is doing brilliantly well. It's partly due to the employee share ownership plans, ESOPs, but also where the employees own most of the company, but it's also due to the fact that they haven't just passively introduced employee share ownership plans, but have actively linked it with employee voice, employee control, employee true sense of ownership in the company. And journalists tend to be quite passionate people, and you can either engage them or disengage them. What they've done is made the journalists highly engaged, and so what you get is quality output from those journalists, and subsequently the customers, the readers, are happy. Now, individual rewards and bonuses have been around for literally centuries, and often include things like piece rates, where you produce one widget, you get paid $1, for example. It is important when you're designing these rewards to realize there can be many, many pitfalls. One of the pitfalls, of course, is safety. So if people are simply focused on producing as many of one thing as possible quickly. Let's say I used to be in the fruit and vegetable business, and that was a common place where you pay for a bucket of apricots, for example, or a basket, or a case, or a kilo. And the problem was that did have a tendency to cause people to run up and down ladders to pick, and that inadvertently there would be accidents as a result of that. Quality similarly, if you're in a hurry to pick kilos, you will not focus on picking apricots that are ripe and ready to pick. You'll just simply try and throw them into the bin, and unless that's monitored at a company level, the impact of these reward systems might be greater production but lowered quality. There's a couple of nice examples in the textbook of that as well. Now, you can also go with team rewards, and they do actually have some benefits in that it improves culture and morale at a company. But you tend to want to use these kind of rewards where the team really genuinely is interdependent and has to work together. And cases where it really is individual effort and the team is kind of artificial, then it's not particularly effective. And it also tends to be less effective in societies like Australia, which are quite individual focused on our own performance, and we're less collectivist. So in terms of job design, it's a complex thing. What can you do to improve the design of jobs within your company? You do need to in job specification, be quite clear about what people have to do, where they have to work with others, and not leave it up to people sort of to intuitively pick up about a job. So modern human resource management includes, as pretty well a standard, job descriptions for this purpose. In terms of specialisation, and we'll talk about this a little bit further in a minute, but it's important to create jobs that are compact enough that you can become really good at them, but big enough still to be challenging. Because if you don't have jobs that have innate challenge to them, as we know, that you'll reduce in motivation, and people will just, like the apricots, pick the apricots and not give a stuff about quality. Now, specialisation, and I'm going to bring up a video that's missing, really annoying. This is the second week this has happened, but we'll get by without the videos. So job specialisation, Google Taylorism and have a look at one of the videos there on Taylorism, the history of Taylorism. There's some good little documentary pieces, 5 or 10 minutes, that will give you a very strong insight into what Taylorism is. But effectively, it's something that developed in the early 20th century, and it focused on cutting work back to identifiable little chunks, measuring those chunks. So the clock was Winslow Taylor's best tool, the tool that he most spent time with. So he would time different events, time them when they were done in different orders or different ways, or when they were chunked smaller or chunked larger, and have a look at the efficiency in terms of time. What happens when you specialise is that you can get ordinary, relatively uneducated people doing highly complex jobs, as long as you break each job down into simple little things. So you can get a nuclear power station built by ordinary blue-collar workers without too much fuss, as long as you break that job, that complex job, down into non-complex small elements. Also, when you specialise and do something again and again, you get better at it. And the other factor that's good about specialisation is that there's less swapping between tasks and less time lost by setting your desk up again to start on something new. You'll find this in your life, every time you come back to study after 2 or 3 weeks at work or whatever, or even a day at work, you'll think, where was I? I need to get back to it. Oh, and it takes you 10, 20 minutes or even longer to get back into the thing that you were working on so efficiently before. So have a look at a video on Taylor if you do want to learn a little bit more about it. But Taylorism is the term to remember. It's about chunking, timing, and efficiency within workplaces. And it's gone a little bit too far, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. The trouble with specialisation is, of course, that by shrinking these jobs, they become less meaningful for people and less intrinsically rewarding. Have a look at hygiene theory. It's annoyingly named theory because it's got nothing to do with hygiene. The two terms to remember here are motivators, which are the things that make things better for the employees, that relate to personal growth and self-esteem needs within an organisation, and the hygienes, which are the causes of dissatisfaction, poorer working conditions. I do have a video here, but I actually don't think it's worth watching, and mainly because motivator hygiene theory is relatively discredited as not being a particularly powerful descriptor of how things work. However, the job characteristics model is quite different. These are the 3 key components of the job characteristics model, and if you wanted to add a 4th, it would be things like profitability, productivity, quality, safety. So you've got your core characteristics of jobs, you've got psychological states that arise from those core characteristics, and that leads to these outcomes, motivation to do work, satisfaction, growth in satisfaction, general satisfaction, and effectiveness of work. But we'll go through some of these points that are a little bit less obvious. Skill variety refers to the different kinds of skills that you bring to work. So if you've got these highly specialized jobs, they are kind of boring. But if you have jobs that are too wide in variety, it can be overwhelming. The task identity is something, like in the car industry. If you manufacture a Rolls-Royce, you are a craftsman, and you get involved with the whole process, possibly even design to some degree. You get to see one car emerge from the plant once a day or once every few days or something like that. Contrast if you work in a Mazda factory or a Hyundai factory, for example. All you get to see all day, quite possibly, is wheel after wheel, putting the nuts on a particular wheel or polishing a particular part of the bonnet or something. You get it. You don't actually get to see what it is you're doing. You don't get a good overall sense of the job. And also, as a result of that, you don't get to see the significance of what you do. And that can be on the organisation, and that can include understanding the impact of production upon profitability, for example, or realising that, like a nurse, for example, that the task you've done has saved a life. The sense that you're personally responsible for an outcome, that's the responsibility thing here with the critical psychological states, and that's the degree to which you feel, it's like self-efficacy, the degree to which you feel you can impact upon an outcome. And, for example, group work does sometimes reduce this sense of responsibility. So if you're in a large team, and there's aspects of the team that actually reduce the sense of responsibility, you can actually start to experience what's called social loafing, whereby members of a group can start to underperform simply because they're in a group and it's someone else's fault and someone else is responsible when it goes wrong. So in relation to job specialisation, it's important to remember that while it is efficient, it can have some major impacts. Oh, nasty spelling mistake. I'll need to fix all these next year. It can have impacts on muscular strain and impacts on boredom. And by fiddling with the specialisation so that you can, for example, rotate people through a number of different relatively simple tasks, you can reduce these impacts. Job enlargement. I mean, I've used the example there of the academic role. In the 1930s, the academic basically sat in Oxford and researched and met once a week with students, often one-on-one, very, very different to what we've got today. These days, like as a lecturer at CQU, I deal with students across Australia. I deal with a large number of students. I deal with students at different campuses as well as online students like yourselves. And I teach more than one subject. And then I've got an administrative role, and I've got a very strong pressure to publish as well. So my role has three key components: administration, teaching, and research. Very, very different. It's become bigger, the job. And that definitely has benefits in terms of reduced boredom, but increased pressure, for example. Job enrichment, looking at adding senses of responsibility to jobs can be ways of improving morale and improving sense of satisfaction in work. I didn't have any luck with this video in class, but I'll just try it. This is a company called Simcoe in Brazil.
Sunny Brazil is a magnet for tourists. Each year thousands flock here looking for sun, sand and the good life. But I've come looking for Brazil's other gift to the world. Welcome to Simcoe. It mightn't look like it, but this is one of the world's most radical workplaces. And the difference begins at reception. In fact, Simcoe has 2 receptionists. Nothing unusual about that, except that the company itself doesn't know which one will be there to greet you.
But we are not sure which one will be there in the morning or in the afternoon, because they talk to each other and they set their own schedule.
Almost every one of Simcoe's 3,000 employees sets their own schedule.
That man is the CEO of this business unit.
It seems the CEO doesn't have an office and is leaving early. He's not the only one.
No reason why they shouldn't.
IT worker Zhao Neto gives himself every Monday off. He didn't ask for permission.
Basically, three
Very
reasons
hard
why
for his supervisor to check up on him.
we can do it.
Like these employees, he keeps changing workstations.
The idea is that you shouldn't use the same position. Should not use 2 days in a row.
It's a rule designed to make employees hard to track.
We can even work here, because if you have one area.
I'll stop it there because I do want to keep the videos to a reasonable length, but the characteristics of Simcoe, and it has had a remarkable and enduring success, is that the employees get to control their own workplace and they have a high degree of discretion about what they do. And this tends to increase the sense of meaning and value that they ascribe to work, the enthusiasm they ascribe to work. It also increases a sense of competence and self-efficacy, the sense that what you do at work can make an impact. Make an impact on success. Have a bit of a further read up on Simcoe, because it is, even if you just do it from a personal sense of stretching your brain as to the options that are available in organisational design. I'm not an expert on Simcoe, but I do know enough to say that it's very, very challenging, and probably that video would have given you a taste of that. Now, to support the sense of empowerment in the workplace, the problem is that there's some people who are just not up to it. So there are some people who truly want to come to work and just do their 8 hours, do the bare minimum, and go home at the end on the tick of 5 o'clock. We need people like this in the world, because there are certain roles that are so boring and so meaningless that we need people who really don't want to think about work and want to daydream all day and just do the bare minimum. But of course, companies need far more people of the opposite sort, ones who are able and capable of getting to work and being motivated by circumstances. So there's also job design factors, of course, in improving people's sense of empowerment. That relates to things like we've talked about: autonomy, task identity, where it's clear what you're doing, sense of significance, and also feedback. And on the feedback thing, remember, relatively prompt feedback. I gave the example in class today that imagine with children, if you were to, like we do with performance evaluations in the HR department these days, imagine if we were to give them feedback once a year, which is the common thing in HR departments, once a year performance review. And we were to say to a child, remember 9 months ago, you didn't share those chocolates with your sister. That was bad. Now, the problem is that that would have no impact 9 months later. And similarly, there's quite a bit of challenging happening to the whole process, or the support for the notion of performance management these days. Companies like Apple, as the textbook points out, have abandoned formal performance management and replaced it with much more effective forms of feedback, which include feed forward, where you give people ideas of what you would like them to improve coming forward, or whether, give them a sense of where they're headed. There's also organisational factors that include having enough resources to support empowerment. I mean, a company in trouble is never a particularly happy company, and the sense of training available, and also the issue of trust, which is something that management is often responsible for. If you give people power within a workplace, for example, give them some autonomy, but then every 5 minutes are either electronically or physically checking up on them, you're eroding their sense of trust, the sense to which they are trusted, and subsequently you'll be reducing the empowerment even though you've so-called increased it. Now finally, let's turn to the issue of self-leadership, which is the process of helping oneself to improve one's motivation needed in performing tasks. And this area includes some concepts from sports psychology, from the science of goal setting and social learning theory. Textbook gives a little bit more detail on that, which is worth reading. But talking about a couple of these, constructive thought patterns, this is kind of like the positive self-talk that you'll find in American, pop psychology textbooks. I am a wonderful person. I'm going to simply dream a pay rise for myself and it's going to manifest itself. Or I'm going to believe that I'm going to find the perfect partner, and subsequently that perfect partner is just going to walk through the door if you're single. So this kind of constructive thought patterns, they do have a value, particularly if it reduces one's sense of negativity. Because being negative and thinking negative thoughts, of course, leads one to become depressed and apathetic, and these can have serious impacts on one's ability to be creative, work hard, and be enthusiastic at work, for example. Having said that, the flip side of these kind of positive self-talk or constructive thought patterns is that they may not be realistic. I'm a big believer in that it's good to know yourself and know your limitations, not because those limitations are absolutely fixed in concrete. That's something that I really don't feel. I feel like it's important to know yourself, but to give yourself the positive self-talk when it comes to, I will be prepared to change this. I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to try inch by inch to make myself better on this particular point. That can be useful. Designing natural rewards, this is an interesting one. If you can actually, as your own leader, pick those elements of yourself and be honest with yourself that you're not good at or that you're reluctant to do. And for example, I hate cleaning my house. This is the example that I like to give. Now, I have worked out all sorts of extrinsic and intrinsic rewards for cleaning my house. I actually hate cleaning my house so much that I found that when I'm feeling down, what I do is I clean the house, and I think the process of completing a job that I really hate, which is cleaning, as well as the reinforcement that comes from having a clean house, lifts my spirits. So I've worked out a way to do a job that I don't want to do. You can also do it with ice cream or go to the movies or whatever. But when you're talking about natural rewards, you're talking about refitting the system so that it provides some intrinsic rewards to you. Reinforcement, self-reinforcement, telling yourself you're good or getting these natural rewards. Now, that's kind of obvious, and we've just talked about those points. And what is going on here? Okay, in terms of self-leadership, remember the big 5 personality markers: conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, and my phone is ringing at the moment. I'll have to deal with that in a minute. Conscientious and extroverted people. Conscientious are the people who keep going with a particular task, and extroverts are the outgoing party types, tend to be better at this type of thing. and they have greater internal locus of control. Locus is basically a fancy word for location of control. And again, a spelling mistake, autonomy. There are also organisational factors that lead to self-leadership. So, for example, having a greater participative leadership, genuine participation by your staff within the organisation can, of course, improve leadership skills, and a measurement-oriented culture. Actually, personally, I'd love to see the literature on that, to see that that is the case. In fact, I should say, it's a bit obvious here, that these are contingencies. These are the factors that affect whether the self-leadership is possible. So if it's a measurement-orientated culture, a strongly measurement-orientated culture, then the ability to have self-leadership is restricted. And of course, in job autonomy situations, it's greater. All right, I think we are done for the week, and only 5 minutes over length. We are almost to the point of the mid-semester break, but I certainly hope for Flex students that you regard mid-semester break as just being any other week and keep on going through, because I know a lot of you are actually working at the same time as studying, and that is really challenging. It's all about time management and self-leadership, if you like. So managing your workforce, which is yourself, to get the optimum out of it. So good luck with all that, and once again, it's good to hear from you, so many of you. Thanks very much.